Chapter 1. 6 hours before my brother was arrested for federal securities fraud, my parents were telling me I did not belong in the room. They said I was too emotional, too unstable, too embarrassing to be seen at the biggest investment gala of his life. What they did not know was that the luxury resort he was using to convince investors to trust him was legally mine. 12 years earlier, they forced me to sign away my inheritance so he could build his empire. 3 days before that gala, his wife tried to trick me into signing a document that would make me financially responsible when his fund collapsed. And that night, while he stood under crystal chandeliers promising millions in guaranteed returns, a federal warrant was already waiting backstage. My name is Lila Hartwell. I am 39 years old. And this is the story of how my family tried to erase me and how they lost everything in a single night. I was not supposed to be there. September of 2024. Downtown Denver. Crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors, reflecting 100 designer heels, and I was standing just outside the ballroom doors of the Westmont Grand, watching my own last name glow in gold across a 12-foot screen. Hartwell Strategic Partners. My brother Evan loved large fonts and bigger promises. A hostess in a black suit blocked the entrance with a polite smile that did not reach her eyes. She had been briefed. I could tell by the way she held the guest list too tightly, as if my name might try to slip back onto it. My mother had called an hour earlier. "Lillian, please do not make this difficult tonight. Evan has worked so hard for this. You know how emotional you can get." Emotional. That word had followed me for most of my life. My father had taken a more direct approach. "You do not understand how real capital markets work. Let your brother handle this. Do not embarrass the family." And then Evan with the casual efficiency he reserved for things he wanted handled quickly. "Do not cause a scene out of jealousy. It is not a good look at your age. I am 39 years old. I have negotiated land acquisitions worth millions. I have signed loan documents that kept me awake for nights. But to my family, I am still the unstable one, the dramatic one, the daughter who could not keep it together." Through the slightly open doors, I could see him on stage. Navy suit, crisp white shirt hair, cut shorter than usual. He was smiling the way he used to smile at Little League games when he knew the cameras were pointed at him. The screen behind him cycled through glossy slides, projected returns, growth charts, and then the image that made my pulse slow instead of race. Blue Mesa Retreat, Santa Fe, New Mexico. Aerial footage of the resort at sunset. Terracotta roofs against desert light. Infinity pool reflecting mountains. My mountains. Evan's voice carried through the speakers. "We have secured strategic alignment with high-performing hospitality assets in the Southwest. Blue Mesa is one example of the kind of property that strengthens our portfolio. I felt the corners of my mouth move into something that might have been a smile if it were not so tired. Blue Mesa Retreat belongs to me. Not to Hartwell Strategic Partners. Not to my father. Not to Evan. To me." Inside the ballroom, applause rippled outward in polite waves. Investors in tailored suits nodded approvingly. I recognized a few from local business magazines. I recognized the way they leaned forward when Evan mentioned collateral and stability. Collateral. He was standing on land I had almost lost more than once. He was selling the illusion of security built on sweat he had never seen. The hostess shifted beside me. "Mom, if you are not on the list." "I am aware," I said gently. Across the room, my mother stood near the front table, pearls resting neatly at her throat. She looked proud, relieved even. My father's hand was on her shoulder, a public display of unity. They did not look like people who feared risk. They looked like people who believed their son had finally restored something they thought I had damaged. I have seen that look before. In 2012, I sat in a law office in Boulder with beige walls and framed degrees that meant everything to my father. I was 27. The trust my grandmother had established in 1998 was finally set to distribute $820,000 earmarked for both of her grandchildren. The attorney slid a revised document across the desk. My father did most of the talking. Your brother has an opportunity, a real opportunity. Tech is exploding. You have always been independent. You will land on your feet. My mother squeezed my hand. Think of this as investing in the family. I remember staring at the signature line. My name looked unfamiliar beneath the overhead lights. I asked what would happen if I declined. My father leaned back in his chair. Your brother needs this more. You are not cut out for the pressure he is about to face. Not cut out, I signed. A month later, when Evan's startup announced its seed round, my father hosted a dinner and toasted his son's vision. No one mentioned my contribution. By early 2013, I packed 2 suitcases and drove south. No farewell party, no dramatic argument. Just a quiet exit that felt less like freedom and more like erasure. Now, standing outside a ballroom in Denver, I felt that same familiar sensation, as if my presence complicated a narrative they had carefully polished. Inside, Evan moved to the next slide. Risk mitigation strategies, diversified assets. He spoke smoothly about alignment and oversight. He did not mention that Blue Mesa Retreat had never signed a single document tying it to his fund. He did not mention that I had never authorized the use of my financial statements in any marketing materials. He did not mention that his language had shifted over the past 6 months from potential partnership to implied security. I listened carefully to the phrasing. Strategic alignment. Collaborative positioning. These were words designed to imply without explicitly stating, just enough to reassure. Not enough to constitute a written lie, at least not in a vacuum. But taken together, they formed something heavier. My phone buzzed in my hand, a text from Evan. If you are out there, do not come in. You will only prove what everyone already thinks. I typed nothing back. Across the ballroom, a slide flashed projected capital commitments north of $12 million. The number drew another round of applause. Evan spread his arms slightly, accepting the validation. $12 million raised in under a year. He was good at raising money. He always had been. Good at raising attention, too. He was not always good at telling the whole truth. The hostess stepped aside to let another couple enter. For a brief second, the doors opened wider, and I could see more clearly. The tables were set with white linen and polished silverware. Investors leaned toward one another, whispering. A few took photos of the screen. My mother laughed at something someone said. My father nodded as if every projection on that screen were already guaranteed. And then Evan said it. With our hospitality asset in Santa Fe serving as a strategic backing component, our downside exposure remains minimal. Strategic backing component. I closed my eyes for a moment and pictured the first night I spent on that land in 2014. No ballroom, no chandeliers, just a folding chair and a thermos of coffee staring at an empty stretch of desert that everyone else had dismissed as too remote, too risky, too ambitious. Banks had dismissed me too. Too young, too inexperienced. Too female, though they never said that part out loud. I mortgaged everything. I signed documents that made my hands shake. I watched contractors walk away mid-project. I slept in a trailer when cash flow tightened. No one from the Hartwell family ever visited. No one asked how the permits were going. No one offered advice on managing construction delays. And now my brother was using the finished product as a line item in his pitch deck. The applause inside swelled again. I opened my eyes. He looked so certain, so convinced that the story he was telling would never be challenged. That certainty was not confidence. It was assumption. The assumption that I would remain silent as I had in 2012, that I would accept being edited out of the narrative for the sake of family. The hostess glanced at me once more uncertain. I stepped back from the doorway instead of forward. Not yet. Let him finish his story. Let them all applaud. I stood in the hallway of the Westmont Grand, listening to the echo of my own last name bouncing off crystalline glass, and I thought about the 12 years they never saw, the 12 years that had quietly rewritten everything. Chapter 2. Back in 2013, I drove west with 2 suitcases, a laptop, and a bank account that looked smaller every time I refreshed it. I ended up outside Prescott, Arizona, because it was far enough from Denver to feel like exile and close enough to civilization to feel survivable. The air was dry and sharp, nothing like the climate-controlled world I had grown up in. I rented a small apartment above a hardware store and told myself it was temporary. It was not. In early 2014, I found the land by accident. 280 acres of scrub and red earth listed by a regional bank that had foreclosed after a developer defaulted. The listing described it as high-elevation desert with limited access and high development risk. The asking price was $1.8 million. Everyone I showed it to laughed. "You want to build what out there?" one broker asked me, squinting at the photos. "A retreat, a destination property." He leaned back in his chair. That kind of project requires serious backing. I knew what he meant. It was not just about money. I approached 2 banks in Flagstaff. I wore my best Navy suit and brought projections I had spent weeks building. The first loan officer flipped through my documents without looking at me for more than a second at a time. "This is ambitious Ms. Hart. Do you have a co-investor with development experience? Number. A spouse who can provide additional income support. Number." He closed the folder gently. "Given the size of the request, we prefer to see stronger guarantees." The second bank was more direct. One of the partners sat across from me and said, "Off-the-record projects like this usually have a male partner with construction background. It reassures the committee." I smiled, thanked him for his honesty, and walked out into the parking lot feeling something hot rise in my throat. It was not just about collateral, it was about who they thought was credible. I put down every dollar I had, liquidated a small investment account, and negotiated seller financing for a portion of the land. I signed documents that left me personally exposed if anything went wrong. When the ink dried, I owned a stretch of desert that most people considered a mistake. In 2015, I formed a holding company in Delaware. I chose the name Horizon Ridge Hospitality, no family name attached. I did not want my father's shadow or my brother's reputation tied to what I was building. The operating entity for the property would later become Blue Mesa Retreat. Clean, separate, mine. I spent months living between my apartment and a folding table on site. I met with architects who warned me about water access. I argued with county officials over zoning. I learned how to read soil reports and construction bids at midnight. One evening in late 2016, my general contractor called me from the job site. "We have a problem," he said. "Cash flow is tight." "Oh, some of my subs are not getting paid on time." I had already stretched every line of credit I could access. "What do you need?" I asked. "Another $200,000 to stay on schedule." I did not have it. 2 weeks later, he filed for bankruptcy. Equipment disappeared. Crews stopped showing up. I stood on a slab of half-poured concrete and felt the wind cut through me like judgment. I considered calling home. I even pulled up my mother's number once. Then I pictured the silence on the other end, the eventual sigh, the unspoken "I told you so." I deleted the draft text and called 3 smaller contractors instead. By 2017, my reserves were nearly gone. The lender who had agreed to partial financing sent a notice about delayed payments. I drove to Phoenix for a meeting that would determine whether they would restructure the loan or initiate foreclosure proceedings. The conference room was cold. The bank representative studied my numbers. "You are over-leveraged. Why not cut your losses?" "Because it is not a loss," I said. "It is unfinished." That night, I signed a restructuring agreement that extended my term and raised my interest rate. My hands trembled slightly as I initialed each page. If the next season failed, I would lose everything. I drove back to Prescott in the dark and slept for 3 hours before returning to the site. There were no family dinners during those years, no holidays spent explaining my progress. I did not post inspirational updates. I worked. In the spring of 2019, Blue Mesa Retreat opened quietly. No ribbon cutting from my father, no congratulatory toast from my brother, just a soft launch with a handful of guests who had found us through word of mouth. The first time I saw a couple sit by the pool at sunset, I allowed myself to exhale. By 2024, the property had stabilized. Occupancy rates were consistent. The valuation came back at just under $48 million. I hired a chief financial officer named Sofia Martinez, a former corporate controller who understood compliance and risk better than I ever wanted to. She was 43, sharp-eyed, and unimpressed by sentiment. In August of 2024, she walked into my office with a printed packet in her hand. "Have you seen this?" she asked. It was a prospectus from Hartwell Strategic Partners. My stomach tightened. I skimmed the document. There were photographs of Blue Mesa Retreat, financial highlights, language that suggested alignment between our assets and their investment structure. "This makes it sound like we are part of their collateral base," Sophia said. "It is careful wording, but it creates an implied association. We never authorized this," I replied. "No. And if investors rely on this language, it could raise securities issues." I stared at the pages. Evan had always been good with phrasing, just enough ambiguity to avoid a direct lie. Sophia continued, "If they are using our performance metrics to support capital commitments without disclosure, that is a problem. Not just for us." She was right. Around that same time, I met Clara Whitfield. She was 66, a retired elementary school teacher from Colorado Springs who had booked a weekend stay with her sister. She wore comfortable sneakers and carried a notebook where she wrote down the names of plants she liked around the property. On her second evening, she stopped me near the lobby. "Are you the owner?" she asked. I nodded. "It is beautiful here," she said. "My nephew told me about your family. He invested with your brother, said he is one of the smartest young fund managers in Denver." I forced a polite smile. "That is kind of him." Clara beamed. "I put a good portion of my retirement into that fund last year. I trust your name." Her words landed heavier than she intended. $240,000, she later told me over breakfast. It felt safe. Established family. Real assets. Real assets. That night, I reread the prospectus Sophia had printed, the language about strategic hospitality alignment, the references to stability, the subtle weaving of Blue Mesa into a narrative that implied security without explicitly stating ownership. This was no longer about old resentments or sibling rivalry. It was about people like Clara who believed the story because it sounded solid. I closed the folder and looked out at the desert beyond my office window. The land had nearly broken me once. I had refused to walk away. This time walking away would not just cost me, it would cost others. That was the moment I understood that what was unfolding in that ballroom in Denver was not a private family conflict. It was something that required a different kind of response. Chapter 3. I did not call my brother. I called a lawyer. His name was Andrew Keller. He was 46, calm, in a way that felt practiced and specialized in securities compliance and corporate disputes. I sent him the prospectus Sophia had flagged and asked for an in-person meeting in Santa Fe. We sat in the small conference room at Blue Mesa Retreat 2 days later. Andrew flipped through the document, slowly reading every line. "This is carefully written," he said. "They never explicitly state that your property secures the fund, but the implication is strong." "Strong enough to mislead investors?" I asked. He looked up at me. "Potentially, especially if performance metrics from your property are presented without disclosure of ownership separation." Sophia sat beside me, her laptop open. They reference occupancy rates and projected revenue from hospitality assets in northern New Mexico, she said. Those numbers match ours. Andrew tapped the page lightly. If investors relied on this language to commit capital, that could raise issues under federal securities laws. But we would need evidence of intent and reliance. Intent, reliance, words that carried weight. Before we could move further, I received a text from my sister-in-law, Megan Caldwell. She was 41, polished, always composed in public. "Can we meet just you and me? I think we can resolve this quietly." I agreed to meet her in Denver the following week. We chose a private dining room at a downtown restaurant. Megan arrived with a leather portfolio tucked under her arm and a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "I am glad you came," she said, taking her seat. "This does not have to become messy." "I am listening," I replied. She slid a document across the table. "It is a simple communications partnership," she said. "We want to align branding between your property and Crestline Equity." Crestline Equity. That was the new name my brother had given his fund after a quiet rebrand. I did not sign anything. I told her my counsel would review it. That evening, Andrew called me. "This is not a communications agreement," he said. "What is it?" "It is a personal guarantee. If the fund cannot meet its obligations, you assume liability up to the outstanding investor commitments." I felt the air leave my lungs. That could be millions. "It could be," he replied. "They are attempting to shift risk." The next morning, Megan called. "So," she asked, "are we moving forward?" "This is not a marketing agreement," I said. "It is a personal guarantee." There was a pause. "You owe your family some support," she said. "Ethan built this from nothing." "From nothing." "I built my company from nothing?" I replied. "You always run when things get hard," she continued. "You left when Ethan needed you most." That was different from the words outside the ballroom. This was not about jealousy or drama. This was about obligation and debt. "I did not leave," I said quietly. "I was written out." She exhaled sharply. "You are too emotional to see the bigger picture. This is how serious business works." After I ended the call, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Ethan. "Why are you making this difficult?" he asked. "I am not making anything difficult. I am protecting my company." "You would let your own brother fail over paperwork. If the paperwork shifts your risk onto me without disclosure, yes." His tone hardened. "You owe your family." There it was again. I hung up before the conversation could spiral. Back in Santa Fe, Sophia intensified the internal audit. She reviewed every public statement Crestline Equity had issued over the past year. We compiled side-by-side comparisons of our actual financials and the language used in their materials. One afternoon, she walked into my office holding her tablet. "There are emails referencing Blue Mesa as a stabilizing asset in investor briefings," she said. "Not written in the prospectus, but in follow-up communications." "Do we have copies?" "Forwarded by one investor who was confused about ownership structure." We brought everything to Andrew. He leaned back in his chair after reviewing the new information. "This moves beyond aggressive marketing," he said. "If they are implying that your property secures their fund without authorization and investors relied on that implication, it could support a claim of material misrepresentation." "What are our options?" I asked. "You can send a preservation notice demanding they retain all relevant communications and cease referencing your property. You can also prepare a report for federal regulators. That does not guarantee immediate action, but it creates a record." I nodded. Sophia drafted the preservation notice that evening. It was formal, precise, and clear. We demanded that Crestline Equity preserve all documents, emails, and marketing materials referencing Blue Mesa Retreat and refrain from further unauthorized association. 2 days later, we received a terse response from their counsel denying wrongdoing. Around that same time, Clara emailed me. The subject line read simply, "Concern." She wrote that she had heard whispers among other investors about liquidity delays. She asked whether Blue Mesa Retreat was officially backing the fund because that was one of the reasons she had felt comfortable committing a significant portion of her retirement savings. $240,000. I called her instead of replying by email. "Clara, I cannot comment on their internal operations," I said carefully. "But Blue Mesa is not legally affiliated with Crestline Equity." There was silence on the other end. "They said your property was part of their strategic base," she said softly. "They have used language that suggests alignment," I replied. "That is different from ownership." "I trusted the name," she said. "I trusted your family." After we hung up, I sat in my office long after sunset. The desert outside had turned deep blue, almost black. If I stayed quiet, my family would avoid immediate scandal. Investors like Clara might remain in the dark longer, perhaps long enough for Crestline to attempt damage control. If I stepped forward, the fallout would be public and brutal. My parents would never forgive me. The Hartwell name would fracture permanently. I thought about the girl in the law office in 2012 who had signed away her share because she did not want to disrupt the family narrative. I was not that girl anymore. Andrew called a few days later. "We have enough documentation to support a regulatory referral," he said. "And if additional evidence surfaces at the upcoming investor gala, it could strengthen the case." "The gala in Denver," I said. "Yes, if misrepresentations continue in a public setting that matters." Sophia added quietly, "If we act, we need to act cleanly. No theatrics, no personal attacks, just facts." I agreed. Over the next week, we organized every document. We created a timeline of communications. We secured copies of investor emails that referenced Blue Mesa as a backing asset. Andrew prepared a detailed memorandum outlining potential violations under federal securities statutes. There was nothing dramatic about the process. It was careful, procedural, deliberate. The night before the gala, my mother called again. "You are not planning to do something reckless, are you?" she asked. "I am planning to protect my company," I said. "You will tear this family apart." I closed my eyes. If it tears, it was already fractured. After I ended the call, I stood on the balcony outside my office. The air was cool, the stars sharp against the desert sky. I did not feel vengeful. I felt steady. The next evening, I drove to Denver. I parked across the street from the Westmont Grand and sat in my car for a moment before stepping out. Andrew was already inside. Sophia had coordinated technical details with the hotel management to ensure compliance if a formal notice needed to be delivered. Everything was in place. Evidence documented. Counsel prepared. No exaggerations, no fabrications, just the truth. I smoothed my jacket, walked toward the entrance, and reminded myself that this was not about humiliating my brother. It was about preventing a larger lie from hardening into reality. When the ballroom doors came into view, I did not hesitate. I was going to step inside, not to destroy my family, but to stop a story that had gone too far. Chapter 4. The doors opened easily this time. The ballroom was warm and bright crystal light bouncing off polished glass. Crestline Equity filled the massive screen behind the stage in clean white letters against a navy background. My brother stood at the center holding a wireless microphone, confidence radiating from him like heat. Investors leaned forward in their seats. Waitstaff moved quietly between tables. My parents sat at the front, my mother's hand resting proudly on the table, my father nodding as if every projected return were already realized. Ethan did not see me at first. He was mid-sentence. Our diversified structure allows us to mitigate exposure through strategic alignment with high-performing hospitality assets in the Southwest. The screen behind him shifted to an image of Blue Mesa Retreat at sunset, the same photograph I had licensed for my own marketing campaign 2 years earlier. Applause followed. He smiled. He loved applause. I stepped further into the room. One of the hotel technical managers caught Sophia's eye across the floor. She stood near the back beside Andrew, calm, composed, holding a slim folder against her chest. Ethan continued, "We are not speculating. We are anchoring our growth to tangible revenue-generating properties." That was the moment. Sophia gave a small nod to the technician. The screen flickered once. Ethan turned confused as his slide disappeared. In its place appeared a clean white screen with a formal header from Horizon Ridge Hospitality, the legal holding entity for Blue Mesa Retreat. A short statement filled the center. Horizon Ridge Hospitality has not authorized Crestline Equity to represent Blue Mesa Retreat as a secured or affiliated asset. Any implication of collateralization or direct alignment is inaccurate. The room went silent. Ethan blinked, then laughed lightly into the microphone. "It looks like we are having a minor technical issue." No one laughed with him. Andrew stepped forward from the side aisle, holding a printed copy of the same notice. "This is not a technical issue," he said evenly. "This is a formal clarification." My father stood up halfway from his seat. "What is this?" he demanded. I walked forward until I was visible to everyone in the front rows. "This is a correction," I said. Ethan stared at me. "What are you doing?" he asked under his breath as I approached the stage. "Protecting what is mine." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Investors began whispering to one another, glancing between the screen and the stage. Andrew continued addressing the room. "Horizon Ridge Hospitality is a separate legal entity with no ownership or collateral relationship to Crestline Equity. Any statements suggesting otherwise are being formally disputed." Ethan lowered the microphone slightly. "This is absurd," he said. "We have strategic cooperation." "Cooperation is not collateral," Andrew replied calmly. From the front table, my mother stood. "Lila, stop this," she said sharply. "You are embarrassing us." I met her eyes. "I am correcting the record." My father's face had gone red. "You are destroying your own family over semantics." "This is not semantics," I said. "Investors deserve clarity." Ethan stepped down from the stage, his voice dropping. "You could have called me." "I did call you," I said. "You sent me a personal guarantee." His jaw tightened. The ballroom doors opened again, but this time not for late-arriving guests. 2 deputies entered, followed by Sheriff Daniel Reeves. He was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, measured in his movements. Andrew handed him a folder. The sheriff approached the stage. "Mr. Carter," he said clearly, "we have a warrant issued by the District Court of Colorado." A wave of stunned silence swept across the room. "For what?" Ethan demanded. The sheriff's tone remained steady. "Allegations of wire fraud and securities fraud related to investor communications and misrepresentation of asset backing." My mother gasped. "This is ridiculous," my father said. "You cannot just arrest him in front of everyone." The sheriff looked at him evenly. "We can when a warrant has been issued." He turned back to Ethan. "Sir, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The words echoed against the high ceiling. Ethan looked at me as the deputy stepped closer. "You did this," he said quietly. I held his gaze. "No," I said. "I refuse to sign another lie." My mother's voice cracked. "You are heartless." I felt the sting of that word, but I did not look away. I did not destroy anything, I said. I refused to carry it. The deputies guided Ethan's hands behind his back. There was no dramatic struggle, just the metallic click of handcuffs that sounded far louder than it should have. Across the room, I saw Clara standing near the back, her sister beside her. Her expression had changed. Not anger, not outrage, something closer to understanding. She met my eyes briefly. I gave a small nod. This was not about revenge. It was about preventing more damage. Margaret Sloan, president of the Denver Business Alliance, stood from her table. She was 62, composed, respected. "This is a serious matter," she said loudly enough for those around her to hear. "The Alliance will be reviewing Crestline Equity's membership and affiliations pending investigation." That statement carried weight. Investors began gathering their coats. Conversations shifted from praise to concern. What does this mean for our capital? Was Blue Mesa ever actually secured? Who reviewed the disclosures? The room was no longer filled with applause. It was filled with doubt. My father looked around as people he had known for decades avoided his gaze. "This is not how this was supposed to happen," he muttered. No, it was not. Ethan was escorted toward the exit. He did not look back again. My mother sank slowly into her chair, her posture smaller than I had ever seen it. "You could have handled this privately," she whispered. "There was nothing private about $12 million, I said quietly. One by one, tables emptied. The screen behind the stage remained frozen on the legal notice from Horizon Ridge Hospitality. Not a single person applauded. And that was when I understood something clearly. The handcuffs were not what cost them everything. It was the silence that followed, the absence of loyal nods, the quick departures, the polite distance that settled like dust over the room. Reputation once cracked does not shatter loudly, it erodes in the space between glances. Within 20 minutes, the ballroom that had been full of optimism stood half empty. Andrew touched my arm lightly. "It is done," he said. Sophia stood beside him, steady as ever. "We kept it clean," she said. "We had. No accusations shouted, no insults thrown, only documentation and law." My father approached me slowly. "You have no idea what you have cost us," he said. I looked around at the fading crowd. "I do," I replied. He shook his head and walked away to follow my mother. Clara lingered near the exit. As I passed her, she spoke softly. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For telling the truth." That was all. When the final guests drifted out, the chandeliers still glowed overhead, indifferent to what had just occurred. I stood in the center of the ballroom for a moment longer. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vindicated. I felt quiet. The truth had finally been spoken aloud in a room that once refused to hear it, and there was nothing left to hide behind. Chapter 5. The next morning, the hotel felt like nothing had happened. The lobby smelled of coffee and polished wood. A conference left brochures on a table. A bellman rolled luggage across marble like the night before had been a dream. Outside Denver, traffic moved on indifferent. Inside me, everything was still moving. Andrew called before I even left my room. "Federal authorities have opened a formal investigation," he said. "It is official now. That means subpoenas, interviews, and a long process." How long, I asked. "Months at minimum, possibly longer. And I need you to understand something. Sentencing is not guaranteed. Outcomes depend on evidence, pleas, and a judge. But if he is convicted of wire fraud and securities fraud, the exposure can be significant. 15 to 20 years is within the realm of what guidelines can support in cases like this, depending on loss amounts and enhancements." I exhaled slowly. "I am not asking for a number," I said. "I just need to know this is real." "It is real," Andrew said. And because it is real, you need to stay disciplined. No public statements, no celebrating, no victory laps. There would be no celebrating. Sophia met me in the lobby. She looked as steady as she always did, but I noticed she had not slept much. "We did what we had to do," she said quietly. "Yes," I said. "We did." On the flight back to New Mexico, I stared at the tray table and replayed my mother's face when the handcuffs clicked. Not because I enjoyed it, but because I could not stop myself. When I landed, the desert air hit me like a reset. Blue Mesa Retreat was calm. Guests checked in, staff moved with routine grace, a couple laughed near the fire pit. The world here was built on quiet, not spectacle. 2 days later, the social consequences began. The Denver Business Alliance issued a statement that Crestline Equity's membership was suspended pending investigation. A few local nonprofits quietly removed my parents' names from upcoming fundraiser programs. People who had always greeted them warmly in public stopped returning calls, the kind of distance that looks polite but feels like exile. My father left a voicemail that night. "Lila, call me. We need to talk." I did not call. My mother tried next early the following morning. "You have made your point," she said when I answered. "Now fix it. Fix it." There was no apology in her voice, no admission of harm, only urgency, as if I had spilled red wine on white carpet and needed to scrub before guests noticed. "What exactly do you want me to fix?" I asked. "Your brother," she said. "He made mistakes, but he is family. You can tell them it was a misunderstanding. You can explain the alignment. You can say you overreacted." Overreacted. The word again, familiar and sharp. "I did not overreact," I said. I corrected a lie. She inhaled, angry now. "You are tearing us apart." I paused long enough to let the silence speak. "No," I said. "I am refusing to be held together by dishonesty." She hung up. That evening, Clara called me. Her voice sounded smaller than it had in the lobby months earlier. "I got an email from Crestline," she said. "They are saying there will be delays and that everything is temporary. Some people are panicking. I do not know what to do." I closed my office door and sat down. "Clara, I cannot give you financial advice," I said, "but I can connect you with someone who can explain your rights and help you understand the process." She let out a shaky breath. "I feel stupid." "You are not stupid," I said. "You trusted what you were shown. That is what this is about." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Your family must hate you." I looked out at the desert beyond the glass. The sky was turning orange. "They are angry," I said, "but anger is not the same as truth." After I hung up, I called Andrew again. "I want to set up legal support for investors who may have relied on misleading materials," I said. "People like Clara." He did not sound surprised. "That is wise," he said, "but do it carefully. No admission of liability. Structure it as a voluntary assistance fund through your company focused on access to counsel and education." Sophia joined the call. "We can create a small program under the Horizon Ridge Community Initiative," she said. "Transparent, capped, and focused on legal resources." "Good," I said. "Not publicity, just help." Within a week, we had a plan. A modest legal support fund for affected investors, administered through an independent nonprofit partner with clear language that we were providing access to counsel and information, not guaranteeing outcomes or assuming responsibility for Crestline. Clara was the first person I told. "You did not have to do this," she said when I explained. "I am doing it because you should not be alone in this," I replied. Her voice softened. "I was scared to call you again, after everything." "You can call me," I said. "Always." That was the first time in weeks I felt something in my chest loosen. My parents did not stop trying. My father arrived unannounced at Blue Mesa Retreat 2 weeks later. The front desk called me because he insisted on seeing the owner and refused to wait. I met him in the private lounge off the lobby. He looked older than I remembered, as if the last decade had finally caught up. He did not sit at first. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, like he was in a courtroom. "You are enjoying this," he said. I stared at him. "If you believe I am enjoying an investigation that could harm dozens of people, then you do not know me at all," I said. He flinched at that. "Ethan is facing serious charges," he said. "You could help. You have influence. You have attorneys. You have money. You do not want an apology," I said. "You want access." His jaw tightened. "He is your brother, and you are my father," I said. "Where was that loyalty in 2012 when you asked me to sign away my trust?" He looked away. "You were always independent," he said, as if that excused everything. I leaned forward slightly. "Independence is not the same as disposable," I said. "You treated me like a resource you could spend." His voice lowered. "We did what we thought was best for the family, I repeated." He nodded, almost pleading. "If he goes to prison, it will destroy your mother." I felt the familiar tug, the trained instinct to protect her feelings at the cost of my own. Then I remembered Clara's voice on the phone. I remembered the investors whispering in the ballroom. I remembered my brother asking me to carry his risk with my name. "I am not responsible for the consequences of fraud," I said. "I am responsible for my choices, and my choice is not to lie for him." My father's eyes narrowed. "You are cold." I shook my head. "No," I said. "I am done." He left without saying goodbye. After he was gone, I walked outside and stood near the courtyard fountain where guests took pictures. The water sounded steady, patient. I let my breathing match it. Boundaries are not cruelty. That sentence had felt abstract once, like something printed on a pastel poster. Now it felt like survival. In late October, Sophia brought me an update. "2 corporate partners have pulled out of your parents' charity event," she said. "They cited reputational risk. Also, the alliance formally removed Crestline from their sponsor list." I nodded. She hesitated, then asked, "Are you okay?" I considered the question honestly. "I do not feel happy," I said. "I feel relieved, and I feel sad that relieved is the best I can hope for." Sophia's expression softened. "Relief is not nothing," she said. "No," I agreed. "It is not." A few days later, Clara emailed me again. This time her message was shorter. "I met with the lawyer you recommended. I feel less lost. Thank you." I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. "You deserve clarity. You deserve safety." That night, I walked out onto the balcony of my office at Blue Mesa Retreat. The desert stretched in silence and the sky was wide and clean. Far off, a coyote called once, then quiet returned. I thought about my brother in a holding cell that first night, then in an interview room, then in whatever legal maze was waiting for him. I thought about my mother sitting in her kitchen furious, not because something wrong had happened, but because the wrong had finally become visible. And I thought about the younger version of me in that law office signing away her inheritance because she believed sacrifice was the price of belonging. I did not feel victorious. I felt free. Not free from pain, not free from consequences, but free from the role they had assigned me, the role that said my job was to absorb the damage so others could keep smiling. I turned off the lights in my office and stayed on the balcony a little longer. If you have ever been told you were too emotional when you were simply honest, or too selfish when you were simply trying to protect your future, I want you to know you are not alone. If you have ever been asked to carry someone else's risk just because you share their last name, you are allowed to say no. If you have a story like that, something you have lived through or are living through now, share it in the comments. I read more than you think, and you might help someone else feel less isolated in their own silence." Then I went back inside, closed the door behind me, and let the desert keep its quiet.